good day, mates. You're here for chapters 26 and 27 of David Walliams' Why am I talking in Australian? Of David Walliams' Gangster Granny. Now remember to pay close attention because we are going to discuss some parts of this story of these two chapters after we listen. So sit back and let's enjoy chapters 26 and 27. Chapter 26, A Figure in the Dark. A long, winding corridor stretched out ahead of them. This was where tourists from around the world queue for hours to see the crown jewels. The old lady and her grandson tiptoed their way silently along it, dripping smelly, icy water from the Thames River in their wake. Finally, they turned a corner into the main room where all the jewels were kept. Like the sun bursting through the clouds on a gray day, the jewels illuminated Ben and Granny's faces. The pair of thieves stopped in awe. Their mouths fell open as they looked at the treasures laid out before them. They were more magnificent than anyone could imagine. It truly was the most superb collection of precious objects in the world. Dear reader, not only were they beautiful and priceless, they symbolized hundreds of years of history. There were a number of royal crowns. St. Edward's crown, with which the new king or queen is crowned by the Archbishop of Canterbury during the coronation ceremony. It's made of gold and decorated with sapphires and topazes, proper bling. The imperial state crown, in which were set an incredible 3,000 gems, including the second star of Africa, the second largest stone cut from the largest diamond ever found. No, I don't know where the first star is. The breathtaking imperial crown of India, set with around 6,000 diamonds and magnificent rubies and emeralds, unfortunately not in my size. The 12th century gold anointing spoon, used to anoint the king or queen with holy oil, not to be used for eating Cocoa Puffs. Not forgetting the ampulla, the gold flask in the form of an eagle, which contains that holy oil, like a really posh thermos flask. And finally, the famous orb of scepters. That's a lot of gear. If all the crown jewels were featured in the Argos catalog, they would probably look like this. Granny took out the rolled-up supermarket carrier bag she'd kept in her handbag, ready to put the crown jewels in. Right, we just need to break through this glass, she whispered. Ben looked at her with disbelief. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get all these jewels in there. Well, sorry, dear, she whispered back. You have to pay 5 pence for plastic bags at the shops these days, so I only brought the one. The glass was inches thick, bulletproof. Ben had smuggled a few compound chemicals out of his science class and combined them to go kaboom if set alight. They stuck the chemicals to the glass with some blue tack. Then Granny attached one end of a ball of pink wool to the blue tack. Wool would be the perfect fuse. Then she produced some matches. They just needed to make sure they were far enough away from the explosion. Otherwise, they might be blown up too. Right, Ben, whispered Granny. Let's get as far away from the glass as we can. The pair retreated around the wall, unraveling the pink wool as they went. You want to light the fuse? Said Granny. Ben nodded. He really wanted to, but his hands were trembling so much with excitement he didn't know if he could. Ben opened the matchbox. There were only 2 matches inside. He went to strike the first, but his hands were shaking so much that it broke in 2 when he did. Oh, dear, whispered Granny. Have another go. Ben picked up the second match. He tried to strike it, but nothing happened. Some river water must have leaked out of the sleeve of his wetsuit. Now both the match and the matchbox were soaking wet. No, cried Ben in desperation. Mom and Dad were right. I am useless. I can't even light a match. Granny put her arms around her grandson. As they cuddled, their wetsuits squeaked a little. Don't talk like that, Ben. You're an amazing young man. You really are. Since we have been spending so much time together, I am 100 times happier than I could ever say. Really? Said Ben. Really, replied Granny. And you are so very clever. You planned this whole extraordinary heist yourself, and you're only 11 years old." "I'm nearly 12," said Ben. Granny chuckled. "But you get my point, dear. How many children your age could plan something as daring as this? But we aren't going to steal the crown jewels now, so it's all been a massive waste of time." "It's not over yet," said Granny, as she pulled out a tin of cabbage soup from her handbag. "We can always try some good old-fashioned brute force." Granny handed the tin to her grandson. Ben took it with a smile and then walked over to the cabinet. "Here goes," said Ben, as he swung back the tin to strike the glass. "Please don't," said a voice in the shadows. Ben and Granny froze in terror. Was it a ghost? "Who's there?" Ben called out. The figure stepped out into the light. It was the Queen. Chapter 27. An Audience with the Queen. "What on earth are you doing here?" asked Ben. What on earth are you doing here, Your Majesty?" "I like to come here when I can't sleep," replied the Queen. She spoke in that instantly famous posh voice of hers. Ben and Granny were surprised to see she was wearing a nightgown and little furry corgi slippers. She was also wearing a coronation crown on her head. It was the most magnificent of all the crown jewels. The Archbishop of Canterbury placed it on her head when she was crowned queen in 1953. The crown, which dates back to 1661, is made of gold encrusted with diamond rubies, pearls, emeralds, and sapphires. It was an impressive look, even for the Queen. "I come here to think," the Queen went on. "I got my chauffeur to bring me over from Buckingham Palace in the Bentley. I have my Christmas address to the nation in a few weeks, and I need to think carefully about what I want to say. One always finds it easier to think with one's crown on. The question is, what on earth are you two doing here?" Ben and Granny looked at each other, ashamed. Being told off was bad enough at the best of times, but being told off by the Queen was on a whole other level of being told offness, as this simple graph demonstrates. Told offness. A parent, a teacher, head teacher, air hostess, librarian, postman, scoutmaster, traffic warden, park keeper, vicar, policeman, judge, the Queen. "And why do the pair of you smell like poo-poo?" "Well," pushed Her Majesty, "I am waiting." "I'm solely to blame, Your Majesty," said Granny, bowing her head. "No, she's not," said Ben. "It was me who said we should steal the crown jewels. I talked her into it." "That's true," said Granny, "but it's not what I meant. I started this whole thing when I pretended to be an international jewel thief." "What?" exclaimed Ben. "Pardon?" said the Queen. "One is terribly confused." "My grandson hated staying with me on Friday nights," said Granny. "I heard him one night calling his parents and complaining about how boring I was." "But, Granny, I don't think that any more," protested Ben. "It's all right, Ben. I know how things have changed since then, and in truth I was boring. I just like to eat cabbage and play Scrabble, and I knew deep down that you hated those things. So I made up stories from the books I read to entertain you. I told you I was an infamous jewel thief called the Black Cat." "But what are about those diamonds you showed me?" said Ben, feeling shocked and angry that he'd been deceived. "All worthless, dear," replied Granny. "Made of glass. I found them in an old ice cream tub at the local charity shop." Ben stared at her. He couldn't believe it. The whole thing, the whole incredible story was made up? "I can't believe you lied to me," he said. I mean," said Granny falteringly. Ben turned to glare at her. "You're not my Gangster Granny after all," he said. Then there was a deafening silence in Jewel House, followed by a rather loud and posh cough. "Ahem," said an imperious voice. And now we have to wait till tomorrow to find out what happens on chapters 28 and 29. Chapter 28. Hung, Drawn, and Quartered. See you then.